Welcome to the Snowbirds Expat Radio podcast, powered by the Snowbird US Day Tracker app. I'm your host, Gerry Scott, and my goal is to give you answers to your cross-border questions, to ease the stress of a cross-border move or extended trip, and to keep you up to date on all you need to know with cross-border rules and regulations. Now let's get on with the show. Welcome to the Snowbirds Expat Radio podcast. Today's episode is going to be very, very interesting. I'm going to tell people you need to take notes. Have a little notepad, because this stuff is serious stuff, and you'll think that you'll never need it. And this is coming from a guy who's never had to had any accidents in Vancouver, touch wood or touch vinyl or touch plastic, whatever we do. But today we have Andrew Iacobelli from, he's a cross-border lawyer that's dealing with if a person was to have an accident, car accident, or any kind of liability whatsoever. This is a guy you need to call. And this is very, very serious stuff. We've never had a guest like this on our podcast, so I'm excited. Andrew's given me a lot of questions, but before we get going, Andrew, tell me more about who you are and the firm that you've established, and then we'll jump into the questions.
Great. Thank you, Gerry, and thank you very much for that very kind introduction. As mentioned, my name's Andrew Iacobelli. I am a personal injury lawyer, and I'm licensed to practice law in Ontario, Canada, and several U.S. states, including Florida, Texas, and Michigan. Just by way of a little bit of background, I established the Iacobelli Law Firm with offices in Ontario, Canada, and in West Palm Beach, Florida. And I primarily represent injured people involved in car accidents and slip and falls. And our practice has enabled us to help Canadians injured pretty well throughout the United States. A few years back, I authored a book because we realized most Canadians aren't aware of this, including friends of mine who are snowbirds. They're just not aware of how auto insurance in particular works when you're traveling abroad with Canada and the United States. And so a few years back, I authored a book just to sort of educate Canadians on what their rights are when they travel to the United States.
Now, is that book available in audiobooks, or is it just a hard copy paperback book?
Presently, it's just a hard copy. It's available on Amazon, but we give it out for free. If anybody's interested, they can reach out to us, request a copy, and we'll send them a copy of the book.
Andrew, do you see my hand going up for the free copy?
Yeah,
I look forward to
absolutely.
reading it, because there's always lots of reading material that I need to take advantage of between Vancouver and Maui. So I look forward to reading your book. So I'm going to jump right into questions. And the first question that I have for you is, what is the key differences between the legal system in Canada and the United States?
Okay, so there's lots of similarities, but there are significant differences as well between Canada and the United States. The first one that most people think about is damages. Damages is a legal term for money awards and civil remedies, civil litigation, which we do in personal injury. And the big difference is in the United States, by and large, there's more access to damages. Okay, meaning people can claim more for pain and suffering and for certain economic damages, but particularly for pain and suffering following an accident. Canada has a cap on damages, so there are limits to what people can recover for pain and suffering. And those can be significant differences, particularly in serious injuries or, sadly, in wrongful death claims. So that's a big difference. Other differences are the American civil litigation system is typically more robust. Cases go to trial quicker. Discovery rules are typically broader, allowing for more depositions, greater discovery. Other differences are just resources. U.S. Courts tend to have greater resources, more judges, and therefore it allows for a more robust legal system, I would say, having practiced both in Canada and the United States. Those are some of the differences. With respect specifically to car accident claims, The differences are largely with respect to the right of recovery. So by that I mean no-fault systems versus at-fault jurisdictions, minimum coverage limits. By and large, in the United States, the insurance coverage minimums that operators of motor vehicles have to have by law are significantly lower than in Canada. So those are just some of the big differences we see.
You know, as I read through this, I'm thinking to myself personally, you know, I have my vehicles that I drive, and I believe that I've got them properly insured. I'm sure after this podcast, I'm going to go whatever I can take away from Andrew. I'm going to make sure that we're properly covered. But I notice when people do rent cars, the first thing they do is they believe that they have enough coverage, and they waive the coverage. Let's talk about that.
Okay, that's a good question. So, ordinarily, if you're renting a car for a limited period of time, it's going to depend on the jurisdiction, but typically it's about 30 days. If you're renting a car just for a vacation for a limited period of time, your auto insurance from home, so let's use Ontario as an example. If you have an auto policy in Ontario, you have a car insured, and you travel to Florida and you rent a car at the airport, your coverage will carry over to that rental vehicle. So you can waive the coverage.
Am I at risk if I waive the coverage? Is there more coverage that I'm not quick enough to read? Am I better to take the coverage?
Well, depends on your coverage. Depends on the policy you have at home. But by and large, at least in Ontario and most Canadian provinces, the coverage is generally pretty good. And so, you know, I'll just give you my experience. I'm the guy that waives the coverage, and I'm extremely cautious when it comes to insurance because of what I do. But one of the things that Canadians enjoy is really excellent third-party liability coverage and underinsured motorist coverage. It's excellent coverage. And so the good news is that coverage comes with you when you travel outside of your home province, anywhere in Canada, and anywhere in the United States. It comes with you. So you can waive that coverage. You know, certain deductibles might apply if your deductible's high, property damage, things like that. But in terms of significant risk, if you're sued because you cause a crash, or if somebody hits you and causes a severe injury and is inadequately insured, the good news is your Canadian coverage should step in and provide you and take care of you in that circumstance.
Now, what about all of us British Columbians that have no-fault insurance with our provincial coverage? What can you say about that?
Yeah, so that's interesting. So the no-fault insurance, and I have to give a disclaimer because I'm not licensed in the state of or in the province of British Columbia. One of our colleagues here is Colton, so I would defer to him because the rules are really strict about giving advice on jurisdictions where you're not licensed. But what I can say is, generally speaking, even in jurisdictions that are no-fault jurisdictions like British Columbia, those policies typically still include third-party liability in the event that you're in a crash outside of your home province. So if you drive outside of British Columbia or you fly outside of British Columbia and you operate a motor vehicle, you will still enjoy third-party liability coverage if you cause a crash. And if you have the endorsement, which most people do, thankfully, you'll also still enjoy underinsured motorist coverage. Because now, once you leave your home jurisdiction, your rights and remedies become controlled to a large extent by the jurisdiction where the crash occurred. So let's use an example here. British Columbia resident travels to Texas Okay? Texas is an at-fault jurisdiction. They do not have a no-fault system. So, two different scenarios. One, the British Columbia resident caused the crash and caused an injury and a loss to a Texas resident. They get sued in Texas. Good news is your British Columbia policy will respond to that and defend you and pay out the claim on your behalf if you're ordered to pay a claim or settlement. Scenario two, British Columbia resident travels to Texas and is hurt by a negligent driver. They're rear-ended and they have a right to sue that driver. Now, if that driver only has $50,000 in insurance coverage or less, but the British Columbia resident incurred $100,000 in medical bills for emergency medical treatment, and also has an extensive claim for pain and suffering and ongoing health care, they will be able to enjoy both their no-fault benefits and they will be able to access underinsured motorist benefits in excess of the at-fault party's policy limits. So just to make that a little simpler, if the claim was worth $200,000, but the at-fault party only had $50,000 in coverage, the underinsured UIM, we call it, or UM portion of the policy from the British Columbia policy would kick in to pay that excess. It would act as if it's an excess insurer to the at-fault party for all intents and purposes.
Now, do you find that most of the cases that the injured individuals are car accident, or outside of the car accidents, motor vehicle accidents, what else are you finding that people are needing your services for?
The vast majority are car accidents for Canadians, particularly Canadians that drive the distance. That we get lots of calls from people who are in crashes, either on their way to their snowbird destination or on their way home back to Canada. But certainly there's other types of injuries as well, amusement park injuries, premises liability, typically like slip and falls, trip and falls, things like that. But I would say the majority, probably 70 or 80% of what we get inquiries for from Canadians injured in the United States are for car accidents.
Okay. You know, one of my biggest fears is that when I'm driving around in Maui, and I get into an accident, and even if it wasn't my fault or if it was the other driver's fault, I'm always fearful that the police, the local lawyers, are always going to support that Hawaiian person over the haole, which are us guys that are visiting the island, regardless how many years and how much money we help contribute to their economy. Does that really occur? I should be fearful?
That's a perception for sure. I do hear that feedback from Canadians, sometimes where it's not clear or there wasn't a witness to the crash. I have heard that from Canadians. Overall, in my experience, that isn't usually a concern. It's pretty rare. I think most police officers, most witnesses to an accident are going to be honest and do a fair investigation without, particularly in areas where there are a lot of travelers. And like you said, they're contributing to the economy and all of that. In my experience, at least, I haven't really seen that, although I know there's a bit of a perception with some Canadians where maybe the police didn't take their word for it on how the crash occurred. I'll give you an example. I had a client, it was in Florida. It's a Canadian resident. It was at a traffic light, and it was essentially a red light, green light dispute. And the police officer um, didn't find completely in favor of the Canadian, who said it was definitely the other car that ran the red light, but there was not an independent witness. So his perception was the police officer favored the version of events from the Florida resident. But in fairness, there wasn't any independent information to corroborate his story. So I wouldn't be concerned with that. To be honest, I would not be concerned with it.
Okay. And what are some of the common mistakes that Canadians make when they enter the United States or they're down in the States? What are the common mistakes that they make when it comes to underinsured or?
So there are a few common mistakes we see. Some are after an accident and some are, and there's an important one before an accident. So I'm going to start with the common mistakes before an accident. Okay, so this is an opportunity for you, if you're watching this or listening, don't make this mistake, because God forbid you're in an accident, it could have severe consequences to your right to recover. So one common mistake is not having adequate insurance. Okay, so if you're going to be in the United States for any prolonged period of time, have insurance. Health insurance, number one, because it usually covers much more than your auto in the event that you end up in an emergency department and require serious medical intervention. So travel health insurance, critical. Look at your auto policy. The most important coverage you can have if you're traveling to the U.S. and you're going to be there for some period of time is underinsured motorist coverage. Different provinces call it different things, but your broker will know what you mean when you say underinsured or uninsured motorist coverage. Okay, it's typically an endorsement. It's cheap in Canada. Most brokers sell it automatically without even telling you, but be cautious, look at it. The other mistake, this is one I encounter with friends and family, is the desire, if they're spending routine time in the United States, they want a car there. They want the convenience of a car. And while it is convenient, a lot of Canadian auto policies will exclude your ability to make a claim against your Canadian policy if you have a vehicle, if you own a vehicle registered and insured in the state where the crash occurred. Your rights and remedies are limited to that insurance policy. So you essentially give up all of these protections from your Canadian policy. And what Canadians enjoy in their insurance in Canada, car insurance, particularly the underinsured motorist coverage, to buy that in the United States is extremely expensive if you're buying that on a U.S. car. And the reason is because there's high risk in the U.S. of being involved in a crash with an inadequately or completely underinsured or uninsured vehicle. In Canada, it's cheap, and the coverage comes with you. So that's something important. Also, if you're in a jurisdiction like you are in British Columbia or in Ontario that has no fault benefits, you give up all of that as well. You have no right to make a claim against the no fault benefits if you're involved in a crash and you have a car insured in that jurisdiction.
You know, it gets me thinking, are people at risk if they do have a car down there and it's insured and they're getting the basic insurance? Are they better off to rent a vehicle than to have their own vehicle in that state?
Depends on the period of time renting, because if you rent over a certain period of time, that could also exclude. So you want to speak to your broker depending on which province you're in. But generally what I would say, if you can, Hawaii's different. It's harder to bring a car to Hawaii, I would imagine. But if you're in the contiguous United States, you're better, if you're going to be spending months at a time there, you're better off to ship your car, drive it, or have someone drive it for you if you need a vehicle in the state. That's my suggestion, because as much as it costs, it will cost you less in the event of a crash.
Yeah. Now I'm getting excited about your book. So I got your book. What is the biggest takeaway from your book, and how did you write it? Like, who were you thinking about when you wrote this book?
I was thinking of Canadians that travel to the United States for work or pleasure and find themselves in a car crash, and things are running through their heads like, I need treatment, but I'm afraid to go to the hospital because I've heard stories about how expensive healthcare is. What do I do now? What do I do with my car? How do I get home? Do I call a lawyer off of one of the billboards immediately? All of those things. Because most Canadians don't know that their Canadian auto insurance provides them with rights and remedies as well, particularly where they're not even injured in a car, right? That's a scenario where it's not intuitive. So somebody takes an Uber to the airport in their home city, jumps on a plane, lands in Fort Lauderdale, takes an Uber to the hotel, walks across the street to the beach, and gets hit by a car. Their car's not there. They were a pedestrian. They have no idea that they have probably, in that scenario, more rights with their auto insurance policy on their car that's sitting in their garage in Toronto than they do as against the at-fault party that just ran them down in the road in Florida. So that's who I was trying to help, because we started seeing Canadians usually that would come to us from U.S. lawyers that had no idea there were these other rights. And so they had a Canadian that was badly hurt, and the at-fault vehicle maybe only had $25,000 in coverage. It was paid out, but the person has $100,000 in medical bills and is off work for months. And their U.S. lawyer, as much as they were trying to help them, just had no idea that there was this other policy that provided medical expenses, rehabilitation, lost wages, and more importantly, underinsured coverage so that they could pursue the full quantum of their claim. So that's what we were really thinking about.
You got me thinking that I should probably take my Canadian policy, because we do have two vehicles in Maui. Take my Canadian policy and make sure I understand what my coverage is, and then try and take that same policy and try and get the agent in Maui to these are my concerns. And does the book cover that at all? Saying that the underinsured motorist, because you're right, that is expensive in Maui, because there's. Now, would it depend on state by state? Because maybe there's not as many people in Maui that.
It certainly does. Yeah, it does depend on state by state, and even within the state where you are and what the risks are. Insurance companies that's their business, is assessing risk and setting premiums accordingly. So absolutely it does. But I would say in the U.S. it's generally, in my experience, much more expensive to try to get the equivalent coverage on an auto policy. You can do it, but it is much more expensive.
Is it safe to assume that Canadians are very naive and Americans can be very, very aggressive? Is that what we have? Is that the reputation we have out there?
No, I don't think we have a reputation for being naive. Look, in the U.S., it's litigious for sure. I mean, anyone who's driven on any of the interstate highways is driven by billboard after billboard, personal injury lawyers advertising. So it is generally, it's a litigious jurisdiction, but there are reasons for that too besides the advertising, right? Like the healthcare expenses are significant. So if somebody's hurt in an accident, the U.S. system is built in such a way that in some jurisdictions, if you want those bills covered, you have really no other option other than to advance a claim against the at-fault party. There are still many jurisdictions in the United States that are at what we would call at-fault jurisdictions. So there is zero no-fault coverage, which means no coverage for your medical bills, no coverage for your wage loss. And so those people, in fairness, if they've been seriously hurt because of someone else's negligence and they've incurred a significant hospital bill and they've lost wages, they really have no other option if they want to recover that money other than to pursue the at-fault driver and their insurance policy. So I think because of that, it's more accepted, and so it has the appearance to Canadians as being more litigious. But that's also because those people have lost more. If a Canadian's injured in their home province and they end up at a hospital, they're never concerned with a medical bill that could potentially wipe them out or bankrupt them. So it's easy to judge the one jurisdiction over another, but you have to look at the whole picture. Why are they doing it? Why is it a necessity there? And I think that's the biggest difference. So, if we were in those shoes, I think any Canadian would do the same thing.
A question I have for you is, so first of all, I hope we don't bankrupt your firm and you end up sending out thousands and thousands of books, because, we have a lot of folks that have downloaded the Snowbird US Day Tracker app. My question is, I get into an accident and I call my insurance agent in Canada. Maybe I am down at in Wailuku and I get hit by somebody. I'm just walking across with my flip-flops and my tank top and I get hit by a car. You're saying that my insurance policy in Canada could cover me? Possibly? Would my insurance agent have any clue? Or the purpose of this podcast is to make sure that people have a person like yourself who can start defending them right away.
Some insurance agents don't know, actually, unfortunately. In that situation, yeah, if you have questions, certainly call us. I'm happy to take calls from Canadians. I'm happy to take calls from other lawyers. We get calls all the time, whether it's a Canadian that was just hurt in an accident, or I would say just about as much from an attorney somewhere in the United States, whether it's Minnesota or Idaho, or and they say, look, I've got this Canadian that I'm representing. I don't know what to do. They've got medical bills of, so much, and the at-fault party only has $20,000 in coverage. What else can they do? Right? So, and we're happy to just talk to people, give them advice, help them understand what their rights are. Sometimes it's not immediately apparent what your ultimately path will be with these cross-border cases, because it could be a situation where there are adequate policy limits in the United States, where maybe there isn't as much of a claim against the Canadian insurance policy. But at the beginning, part of what we do is explore that. We try to find out what your options are, what the coverages are in place, both in the jurisdiction where the crash occurred and in your home jurisdiction. And then typically once we tease that out, the path becomes more clear. And if it's something we can assist with, we do. But like I said, we've pretty well helped Canadians in almost every state, if not every state. And sometimes we can help, and sometimes it's just a matter of introducing them to the people that can help them.
Just quickly talking about the insurance business, in the United States, they have public adjusters. We don't have those in Canada, do we?
The public adjuster is common in the United States, yes. Yeah.
But it's not common in Canada, is it?
No.
Why is that?
Actually, I don't know. That I don't know.
Because it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we have clients in Maui that are public adjusters, and they've been busy with all the home claims on the Big Island, and now with all the fires on on Maui, it just seems like the insurance companies are so easy to want to walk away, and these public adjusters are doing such an incredible job.
They are, yes. It's far more common in the context of property damage claims. We don't really see it in the context of motor vehicle accidents.
Okay. Now, before I let you go, and I got to tell you, this would be a great webinar for us to put together a webinar, because I think this is very, very serious. And sadly, a lot of folks are really lost. I mean, you've got the stress of a family member either being that has died in a car accident or seriously injured. I can see how important this is. I mean, I've taken a lot away. I look forward to your book. Now, is your book just available? You just going to send out a link and we can just access it online, or how does that work when it comes to the book you've written?
No, we're happy to send. We'll send you a hard copy, and you just request it, and we'll send it to you with pleasure. We'd love to send it out.
Okay. Well, I got to tell everybody, this podcast is not a do-it-yourselfer. We've always said that what we wanted to build was have the ability to connect people, educate people, but also connect them with great professionals like yourself, Andrew. So thank you very much. It's very much appreciated, the time you've given us. And I look forward to reading your book. And I look forward to referring any clients we can that need help, because this is one of the most important things we've covered on our podcast.
Thank you, Gerry. It's been my pleasure. I appreciate it. And I am a listener of your podcast. I enjoy it. You know, having business and cross-border ties myself, I find your podcast very informative. So it's really an honor for me to be part of this. So thank you again.
Thank you again for listening to the Snowbird Expat Radio podcast. The best way you can support the podcast is to forward the episode to a friend, and please don't hesitate to like, subscribe, or leave a comment. Now, before you go, let me leave you with one of my favorite quotes. Be kind to all, the world is small.